An independent editorial defense analysis focused on Australia's strategic environment.
The trajectory of the Australian defense industry is often viewed through the lens of procurement cycles. Yet a more instructive historical marker is found in the Ikara missile system. Developed in the 1960s, this anti-submarine weapon was not merely an assembly of imported components. It was a demonstration of a complete sovereign design loop, moving from a distinct operational requirement through domestic research and development to full-scale manufacturing, and eventual export to the Royal Navy and Brazilian Navy. The existence of Ikara proved that the Australian industrial base could conceive and deliver complex guided weapons, weapons that, in specific contexts, outperformed contemporary American equivalents such as the ASROC system. This historical precedent casts a long shadow over the current guided weapons and explosive ordnance enterprise. It forces a critical examination of what constitutes genuine sovereignty in an era defined by globalized supply chains and rigid technology control regimes. The Australian government has committed 37 billion Australian dollars over the coming decade to this enterprise, a figure that signals a profound shift in strategic prioritization. However, the allocation of this capital suggests a divergence from the autarkic philosophy that birthed Ikara. The immediate focus on establishing assembly lines for the guided multiple launch rocket system at Orchard Hills represents a strategy of industrial resilience rather than pure sovereign design. In this context, the objective is not to create a uniquely Australian missile to replace an American one, but to integrate Australian manufacturing nodes into the broader American supply chain. This approach prioritizes the security of supply. It prioritizes the replenishment of magazine depth over the intellectual prestige of indigenous creation. It is a pragmatic calculation. Driven by the deteriorating strategic environment in the Indo-Pacific, where the lead times required to develop a new weapon from scratch are viewed as an unacceptable operational risk. This integration strategy introduces a complex trade-off regarding the nature of control. While the domestic assembly of these systems creates high-skilled employment and shortens the logistics chain from factory to firing unit, it does not necessarily confer operational independence. The intellectual property, the guidance software, and the critical path components largely remain under the purview of foreign prime contractors and their home governments. The constraints imposed by the United States international traffic in arms regulations serve as a mechanism of control, one that can limit how, where, and when these locally assembled weapons are modified or deployed. Unlike the Ikara program, where the Australian Department of Supply held the design authority, the modern enterprise risks creating a capability that is industrially located in Australia but technologically tethered to Washington. A critical examination of the manufacturing process reveals that the true bottleneck for sovereign capability lies not in the final assembly of the chassis or the airframe, but in the production of energetics and solid rocket motors. The ability to cast high-performance rocket propellants and manufacture military-grade explosives constitutes the foundational chemistry of any guided weapons program. Without a robust domestic energetics sector, an assembly facility remains little more than a sophisticated logistics hub, dependent on the importation of the propulsive and explosive cores of the weapon. The reliance on imported solid rocket motors creates a single point of failure within the supply chain, undermining the very resilience the enterprise seeks to build. Re-establishing this chemical engineering capability represents a far more significant technical and regulatory challenge than the construction of integration facilities. Yet it is the prerequisite for any claim to genuine independence in munition production. The ghost of the Ikara Spirit, however, may not be found in the replication of conventional missiles, but rather in the emergence of autonomous systems. The MK-28 GhostBat and the Ghost Shark programs indicate a shift in the locus of innovation, from the effector to the delivery platform. These systems, designed and developed within the Australian ecosystem, reflect a modern interpretation of the sovereignty once held by the Ikara designers. By focusing on autonomous systems, the Australian industry is bypassing the saturated market of conventional missile bodies to secure a niche in trusted autonomy and human-machine teaming. This aligns with the concept of asymmetric advantage, where a middle power leverages superior software and integration capabilities to offset the mass of a larger adversary. The GhostBat program, in particular, suggests that Australian sovereignty in the 21st century will be defined by the ownership of the algorithm and the platform architecture, rather than the explosive ordnance it carries. This transition from a platform-centric to a system-centric view of defense necessitates a re-evaluation of the role of small to medium enterprises. During the Ikara era, the government factories were the primary engines of innovation. Today, the agility required to develop hypersonic technologies or advanced guidance systems resides often within the commercial sector and specialized startups. The integration of companies like hypersonics into the broader defense architecture tests the procurement system's ability to absorb risk and iterate rapidly. The challenge for the defense organization is to create contracting mechanisms that can sustain these smaller entities through the valley of death between prototyping and production. If the 37 billion Australian dollar investment flows exclusively to multinational primes for the assembly of legacy systems, the opportunity to cultivate a new generation of sovereign design capability will likely be lost, leaving the industry structurally dependent on foreign intellectual property for decades to come. The tension between the desire for an indigenous industry and the necessity of alliance integration defines the current strategic posture. The decision to co-produce the precision strike missile with the United States is emblematic of this dynamic. It offers Australian industry access to the cutting edge of long-range fires technology, but cements the Australian Defence Force as a node in the American kill chain. From an operational standpoint, this interoperability is a force multiplier, ensuring that Australian platforms can seamlessly integrate with coalition networks. However, it also implies that the Australian strategic concept is now inextricably linked to American doctrine and technology release cycles. The distinct Australian way of war, which once drove unique requirements leading to unique solutions like Ikara, is increasingly being subsumed by the standardization requirements of the alliance. Ultimately, the measure of success for the guided weapons and explosive ordnance enterprise will not be the number of missiles rolling off the line at Orchard Hills, but the depth of the industrial ecosystem that supports them. If Australia succeeds in mastering the production of solid rocket motors, guidance sets, and advanced warheads, it will have reclaimed a measure of the strategic autonomy lost since the 1990s. If, however, the effort remains confined to the assembly of imported kits, the capability will remain fragile, subject to the whims of global logistics and foreign legislative approvals. The legacy of Ikara serves as a reminder that technological sovereignty is possible for a middle power, but it requires a willingness to accept development risk and a commitment to maintaining the intellectual foundations of the industry, rather than merely purchasing the end result of another nation's ingenuity.